Go ahead.
Great. So in her role as a policy analyst with the County of San Diego Child Welfare Services, Ms. Joanna Toll oversees the policies and procedures that affect families affected by the commercial sexual exploitation of children, or CSEC. A UCLA master's degree graduate, Ms. Toll has been serving foster youth and their families in LA and San Diego for over 13 years. And in 2013, she began her career as a protective services worker in residential services, where she served youth who were at risk for and who were actively being sexually exploited within San Diego County. Guided by her direct experience with youth, Ms. Toll began training new social workers about the prevalence, dynamics, and warning signs of CSEC. And over the last 3 years, Ms. Toll has supported the development and implementation of the Child Welfare Services CSEC program. And we're really excited to hear Joanna talk about, or Ms. Toll talk about, Health and Human Services Agency and the Child Welfare Services CSEC program.
Awesome. Thank you, Kanani. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, especially after a long day, probably in front of the computer and probably on Zoom. So I'm really happy that all of you are taking your time to be here to learn about this important topic. Some of them may be review. I saw some familiar names that were in the participants and through introductions, but ultimately my goal tonight is for all of you to understand the role of child welfare services, maybe dispel some myths that may exist out there. I want to talk about our responsibilities for youth that may be at risk of sexual exploitation, particularly what does it mean to be at risk. And then I'm going to share knowledge about what our agency's response is to identifying and serving youth who have been sexually exploited. And then we'll talk a little bit about resources that exist for youth. I'm very happy to have Denise Thompson on the call. One of the major providers that we work with is San Diego Youth Services, and she did talk a little bit about eye care, and I'm actually going to ask her if she's still on to talk about it a little bit at the end as well. So thanks, Denise, for volunteering in the spur of the moment. So ultimately, Child Welfare Services, many of you are familiar with who we are. We're known as CPS. We address situations where there are suspicions that a child has been abused or neglected. And I'm going to talk in general about our agency first, and then I'll speak more specifically about how that actually connects to the sexual exploitation of children. So yes, safety is part of the solution and what we aim for, but the other part of that, the other vision that Child Welfare Services has, is that every child grow up safe and nurtured as well. We are committed to not just ensuring safety, but figuring out whatever pieces of a child's life and family life may need some extra help and support so that they can be nurtured, so they can grow up safe and nurtured. With this vision in mind, there's 3 main priorities that child welfare has. So ultimately, despite what is portrayed in the media, our #1 goal is to safely stabilize and preserve families and keep them together. However, that's not always possible. And in that event, our goal is to reunify them with their families of origin. And then if that doesn't work out, then ultimately we want to make sure they are somehow connected permanently to some family members, whether that be birth or chosen or through people that they've met throughout the child welfare system. So we get a lot of phone calls, and of these phone calls that we receive, like for example, last year we received over 40,000 phone calls. Of those, about 20,000 were actually investigated in person, so only about half. And then of those, about 3,000 were actual situations where we had to intervene in some way. It is not that common that we actually intervene and remove a child from their home, from their neighborhood. It is something that's done as a last resort and only when we can identify no other means of safety. And of the people and families who have been, who have not been able to safely care for their children and do require removal, about 60% of them reunify back with their family within 3 years. And of the children who are not able to reunify, about 75% of them find some type of permanency either legal permanency or relational permanency with someone else in their family or a new family within 3 years. So the other parts of our agency that help us meet these priorities are our values. And ultimately, these seem very basic, but all of the policies that I oversee and really within our entire agency, if we can't tie it back somehow to these values, or if these values haven't been expressed, that's something that needs to be brought to our attention so that we can make sure that we are carrying out our vision. So our 6 core values are to make sure that relationships, children, youth, and families are at the foundation of our work, that we have collaborative partnerships with kinship and resource families, that we help children and youth achieve their full potential to develop lifelong relationships, that we have shared responsibility with our community partners, many of whom are participating right now, that we have a strong working relationship with the legal system, and that we have a workplace culture characterized by reflection, appreciation, and ongoing learning. And as someone who typically provides training and education for our new and current social workers, this value in particular is very important to me. And for a lot of the information that I'm going to share, it's still new to many of our staff, and not just our new staff, because understanding how child welfare's role is for this particular population takes kind of like a retraining of your brain, just the way that child abuse and neglect are defined, which I'll go over in a little bit. So we serve the entire county of San Diego. We are split up in different regions, and some of the services we provide are completely regionally based, and some of the services, like residential services, for example, which is where I first went to when I was hired by the county, we serve the entire county. My previous role as a residential services social worker is I worked with youth who had been removed from their families and required 24/7 oversight and care due to mental health challenges or behavioral challenges. So they were placed in congregate care, formerly known as group homes and now known as short-term residential treatment facilities. So many of the youth that I worked with, on top of having several different mental health and behavioral health challenges, were highly at risk of being sexually exploited. And it got so, I guess, severe that there were literal exploiters who would hang out like very close to where these group homes were, very close to where these shelters were, kind of waiting for youth to leave and approaching them as soon as they've left, and then building some type of relationship or friendship with them with the intention of eventually exploiting them. So I served like at a time, maybe 20 to 25 families at a time. And I can say with certainty, over half of the youth that I worked with were actively being trafficked within San Diego County. And really they're being taken all over in terms of up and down the state of California, to Vegas, to Phoenix. And then the other half of my caseload, maybe I didn't know for sure that they were being exploited, but they were all definitely very highly at risk of being sexually exploited. So although this is my background, a lot of what I'm actually going to talk to you about today is more so the policy and what does child welfare need to do? What are our protocols? What is the threshold for mandated reporting? And then we're going to go through some examples for mandated reporting, and we can talk through them a little bit. And then I'll share our child welfare response. But this slide, everything that I share with you, this is like the ideal. This is what we want to happen. However, reality may look a little bit different. So I'm hoping that as you are armed with this information and you have an idea of how things are supposed to look, that you can bring it to our attention if it's not really carrying out the way that I'm describing. So child welfare services itself is huge. We have several different social workers that all have one job title. Similar to nurses, you have one job title, but you could really work in any part of the hospital if you're in a hospital setting. So each social worker is trained specifically to their role. So for example, if you get assigned to the hotline, you only know the hotline. And if you were to transfer somewhere else, you would need to learn that job all over again. So depending on where you are assigned and where you choose to transfer, the amount of experience you may have for that particular position may vary quite a bit. So I'm going to speak a little bit more about each of these before transitioning specifically about sexual exploitation, just so that we have a framework of what the different pieces of child welfare are. So if you call the hotline, it's open 24/7. These are all protective services workers. Several of them have had investigative experience. So a lot of them may seem to ask you a lot of questions that you may not seem are relevant at the time, but they're really just trying to get as much information they can to pass off to the investigating social worker, because at one point they were in those shoes, and that's the information they wish they would have had. So they answer all the calls, and they determine, based on that information, does this meet criteria for an in-person response? And if so, how and when should we respond? Do we need to go today, within 24 hours? Can it wait 5 days from now, or can it wait 10 days from now? And it all depends on how much we think the child is at immediate danger in this moment. Like, if we don't respond in this moment, will they be harmed? Or are they in a situation that, we have a little bit more time and we can check in on them within 5 days or within 10 days? Emergency services are the social workers that actually go out in the community to the families' homes or to the schools or to the clinics or hospital sites, and they interact directly with the family to take in all the information about what's been reported to the hotline. And they have, based on the information that they're able to gather, based with interviews with you, with any school professional, with neighbors, with law enforcement, they then conclude the investigation as either unfounded, inconclusive, or substantiated. And if once they're done with this conclusion, they can either close the referral, open a voluntary case, or file a petition. Filing a petition means that we have court involvement. We need the court to support our decision to intervene with this family. If there's a situation that is unsafe in that exact moment, the social worker has to get a warrant to remove the child from the parent or caregiver unless they have exigency. An exigency means that if I leave this child here right now, they will get hurt. So those are the only scenarios where a social worker could actually remove a child without anyone else consulting with them about it. It's actually very difficult for us when we do our investigations to make any types of decisions on our own. There's a whole team of supervisors and managers behind us. And if we're actually actively doing a removal, there's a whole court system behind us that we need to be able to show evidence to, that this is why we're doing what we're doing. If they come into care, meaning we've removed them, or we are deciding that things are not safe unless we stay involved, they can either join voluntary services or court intervention. So for voluntary, we're involved and the court's not. So usually the child is still in the home, and we have 6 to 12 months to address whatever safety issue it was that led to this child even coming to our attention in the first place. And if the situation isn't resolved, then we need to involve the court. Sometimes we go straight to involving the court, and they get yet a new social worker, who is the court intervention social worker, who has to gather more information and present that evidence to the court to support our decision to remove this child or to have further involvement in their life. And that same court intervention social worker then provides recommendations about the placement, the case plan, services, visits, safety goals. Who do we need to make sure that this child is connected to in the community? Continuing services are the social workers who work with children that have already been removed from their families. So they're working on family reunification and family maintenance cases. So they're making sure that visits are happening between the children and the parents and anyone else the child deems is important to them. They're monitoring the services that they have access to. If they're not able to get into services, that social worker's responsibility is to help break down whatever barriers there are so they can get access to treatment and help. They're assessing the family's progress. They're assessing how the child is doing, but also what progress has the family made toward meeting their goals. And they're checking in with every family member at minimum of monthly. So the continuing services are regionalized, but we also have specialty units. And The medical fragile unit has workers that are both emergency response and continuing services workers. Residential services, where I worked prior to these new roles that I've had, there was only a continuing services unit. So I didn't do investigations the way that I previously described in the other role. The youth that I worked with were already removed from their families. And then we have an Indian specialty unit specific to working with our native populations. And we have San Pasqual Academy, which is, it's a kind of a dormitory style placement / school for youth who qualify to go there. And those social workers are actually based at San Pasqual Academy. So despite where a youth lands in any of these units I'm describing, we have had youth that have been exploited in all of these spaces. So our agency as a whole, rather than having a dedicated, youth who've been sexually exploited all get one social worker from one unit to handle their case, our county has decided that all social workers need to know what to do in terms of screening, in terms of identifying and serving youth who've been sexually exploited. So I'm going to move on, but ultimately, if we're not able to reunify a child with their family when we're working a family maintenance or reunification case, there are these other options that we strive to while they're in the system. We're trying to find someone to adopt them. If not, then we're trying to find someone who will take legal guardianship of them. If that's not working out, we are at the same exact time, we're looking for a fit and willing relative. And in many scenarios where I've worked with, removed from parents, and over time, youth have remained in care and parents have remained involved with the family or with us, and we're able to reunify, and they are considered a fit and willing relative, even though we weren't able to do it in the first place. Or they go to extended foster care, which is for our youth that are 17 to 21 years old. And it's a voluntary program that they're able to participate in, where they receive a stipend to help with their living arrangements, but they need to be enrolled in high school, college, or have been working part-time, at least 20 hours a week, or working on some type of service that's getting them toward education or vocational career. So the intersection, child welfare services and CSEC. Here's a quote we had from a former foster youth and survivor. They shared, "Being in foster care was the perfect training for commercial sexual exploitation. I was used to being moved without warning, without any say, not knowing where I was going or whether I was allowed to pack my clothes. After years in foster care, I didn't think anyone wanted to take care of me unless they were paid. So when my pimp expected me to make money to support the family, it made sense to me." So unknowingly, child welfare as a system, we are just systemically normalizing this move for the youth that we are supposed to be, making sure are safe, making sure are nurtured. But unknowingly, we've perpetuated to more youth being exploited. And I understand most of you are part of the health subcommittee and you know what this is, so this may be a review, but in terms of what I'm talking about when I talk about commercial sexual exploitation, 3 things need to exist. The abuse of power differentials, such as a power differential between an adult and a child, or the exploitation of a person's vulnerabilities. In order to induce a sex act, this could also mean something that leads to sexual arousal. It doesn't necessarily need to be a physical sexual act. So anything leading to sexual arousal in exchange for something of value. And valuable things can be money, obviously, but they could also be more tangible things like shelter, food, cell phones, gifts, clothing, but they can also be intangible, like love and belonging, and friendship, acceptance. So when there are these 3 dynamics of power, sexual arousal or act, and something of value being traded, that is commercial sexual exploitation. I've had some social workers share that, no, that's not CSEC. That person doesn't have a pimp. You don't necessarily need to have a third party person profiting off of the sexual exchange for it to be considered exploitation. There just needs to be an exchange and some type of power imbalance. So given what I've shared about what CSEC is, given that I've shared that our system has perpetuated how this is happening with our very vulnerable youth, there have been some major changes to the laws in the last 5 years. So child welfare from its inception has always been about in-home abuse. Oh, that didn't happen by the parent or the caregiver, that goes straight to law enforcement. When we're talking about youth who've been sexually exploited, it's like, oh, well, the parent's not necessarily the one exploiting them, call law enforcement. So before this law came into play, where were our youth being taken if they were on the street trading sex for shelter, money, survival? They were taken to juvenile hall. They were arrested, seen as criminals, and then taken to the hall and then eventually maybe released to their parents. Child welfare had no role in this whatsoever. So in 2015, this changed. The law in California amended the WIC 300 E2 code. So within child welfare, the 300 codes are what we are allowed to investigate. If there's some type of allegation of something that fits in that code, that's what gives us the authority to go and try and do something about it. So CSEC falls under WIC B2, which is general neglect. And we are specifically looking at what has the parent done to protect this child from being sexually exploited, even if they were sexually exploited by a third party somewhere out of the home. So that's a major shift in how child welfare used to work. It was only about things that happen in the home, and now this new law is saying, no, it also counts things that are happening outside of the home if it's related to sexual exploitation. So with this law, when it became a mandated report, it also required the development of a CSEC interagency protocol, which I'll talk about. Then a year later, another law came out that said, child welfare, you are now receiving all these reports. You are responsible for identifying, documenting, and cross-reporting anyone you learn about who may be a victim of commercial sexual exploitation. So that meant law enforcement entities had to talk to us. We had to talk to law enforcement. We needed to report to NCMEC, the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, and we needed to begin tracking this. We needed to figure out who does this affect, what are we doing about it once we've identified that this is affecting a particular family. And then a year after that, children were still being arrested for trading sexual acts. So they made a change to the penal code, which is specific to solicitation or acts of prostitution. So now the penal code also reads, you cannot arrest children who are under the age of 18 for these specific crimes. And instead of arresting them, you need to refer them to child welfare services. So there's been 3 laws in the last 5 years that say you need to call child welfare services. And despite that, it's still really muddy for people. It's still kind of seen as something that's like, well, what are they going to do about it? So why would we report it to them? That doesn't make sense. So these are the laws, and now I'm going to try and break down more specifically, if you're recognizing this with patients that you work with, how it kind of fits in with child abuse or neglect. So I talked about this. This is just a summary of the actual laws. CSEC is included under mandated reporting law. Sex trafficking is under child welfare's jurisdiction, and we're looking at, did this parent fail to protect or provide for this child? Did they fail to protect them from being sexually exploited? So the state definition of what it means to be at risk for CSEC is very, very broad, and we're going to have some practice soon going over this. So it's either you have a minimum of 1 of these things in the first column or a minimum of 2 of these items in the second column. And if you see any of these things going on, you actually would report to the child abuse hotline. And that is very different than maybe how previous trainings have shared, because we kind of want, or in the past, we've trained, if you saw something or you heard something or you know that this happened, then you report it. You don't just report because you think they're going to be physically abused or you think they're not going to be provided with food. With CSEC, it's totally different. So it's very confusing. we report even if we think they may be at risk of being sexually exploited, even though we're not positive, because we don't want mandated reporters to necessarily be the ones investigating that information. You've done your role by telling us, I saw a red flag. And now it's up to child welfare to further assess whether or not that is happening. And of course, we work very closely with law enforcement as well to see if that's happening. So these criteria. The first column, either we think that they are indicating that they're being controlled or groomed by another person. If we know that they spend time with people known to be involved in commercial sex, if their use of internet, cell phone, or social media involves social or sexual behavior atypical for their age. So if you see one of those things, that's enough to report to the hotline, even if you have no idea whether or not this youth is actually being sexually exploited. The second column is you need two of these things to be present. They have a history of running away, unstable housing, including multiple foster care placements or periods of homelessness, including couch surfing, or they've had prior involvement with law enforcement or the juvenile justice system, or they're frequently truant, missing school, or they have relationships that are concerning, placing them at risk or in danger of sexual exploitation, or they have a history of substance abuse, specifically narcotics, opiates, crack cocaine, and amphetamines. So while these indicators, particularly in the second column, seem very, very broad, they're actually based on research that was conducted that showed that now, looking backward, if we're looking at a group of people who have come forward that they're survivors of sexual exploitation, what are the things that they have in common, or what are the risk factors that we saw that we may have missed in the past? That's where this information comes from. So general warning signs. Now this is different than the at risk, because these types of red flags should tell you right away that you need to do something. And one red flag by itself, or one warning sign by itself, doesn't mean that someone's being exploited, but it's a cluster of these things. I can't tell you like there needs to be at least 3 of these things. This is not a state definition like the previous slide was. This is more of survivors have shared with us that these are the things that we need to be looking for and keeping our eyes on. And if enough of them show up, that should make you concerned, and that should mean that you report to the child abuse hotline and law enforcement. So if they have a sexually explicit online profile on community sites such as Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat, if they have dating apps on their phone, so many of our youth have reported that they've been trafficked over eHarmony and Plenty of Fish. And if you're under the age of 18, why do you need to have dating apps on your phone? Like, what's going on that you need to connect with people in this way? That should be a red flag. An unrelenting attachment to phone. I know we're all addicted to our phones and our media, but what we mean by unrelenting is if you try to remove that phone in some way or pause and not have phone time at the moment, that the reaction is more than just a snarky attitude or an initial denial. It's like rage, or it leads to like possible violence or throwing things. We had a youth who was engaged in a social support group and would not let her phone go. And when over and over she was asked to, turn it in because she wouldn't put it away by herself, she like lifted a chair and threw it to the ground. So that is an example of a very disproportionate reaction to this request about the cell phone. If there's any prepaid credit cards, hotel motel key cards, presence of an older boyfriend or peer, this could extend to like an older cousin and an older auntie. We've had adults claiming to be close to children come visit our shelter, Polinsky Children's Center, and say like, oh, I want to have visits with them. And this person has never been on our radar when we've known this child for quite a while, but we never knew who this cousin or auntie was. So presence of kind of an unfamiliar adult that's trying to gain access to this child. Lack of identification, their appearance does not match their stated age. Change in dress or general appearance, nails and hair done. Maybe if you're not seeing these youth on a regular basis, you wouldn't necessarily know about their change in dress. This doesn't necessarily mean only nice clothing or designer label clothing. It could also mean just a complete shift. We had one youth who used to dress kind of in a preppy fashion, and then she completely went and wore like hoodies and sweatpants to school every day. So that wasn't necessarily something showing that she has new items, but to her, she had one type of identity where she could be comfortable at school, and then she changed into her work identity as soon as she left school. So the change in clothing itself, it doesn't need to necessarily be in a particular or specific way. Just any shift, any major shift at all is a warning sign. If they have new items like cell phone, clothing, jewelry, not going to school, not coming home, referencing to travel to other cities. We had one youth who was very familiar with all the truck stops off of the 5 freeway, and like we didn't understand at the time what that meant, but that could be a warning sign that unless someone in your family is a truck driver or somehow involved in transit, like why would you be familiar with all the truck stops on the way up north? So if they appear to have coached or rehearsed responses, or if they have new tattoos, so specific to healthcare providers, these may be some indicators that show up that honestly should scream some type of abuse. This should be telling you that this person has suffered some type of injury, but maybe you're thinking it's physical abuse, or maybe you think they've been sexually assaulted. These indicators by themselves, we tend to lump them into one type of abuse or one type of incident, but they can be very telling of exploitation and trafficking. So physical health indicators: bruising, unexplained scars, dental problems, cigarette burns, malnutrition, poor diet, dehydration, bald patches, headaches, back pain, stomach pains. For sexual health indicators, having multiple STIs, multiple pregnancies or multiple abortions, impacted sponges, condoms, tampons, or baby wipes, or vaginal wall tears, or other evidence of sexual trauma. So we just need to open our minds that yes, there's clearly been some type of physical or sexual abuse here, but can it be linked to trafficking? We need to rule out that someone is being sexually exploited. It could be deeper than just what presents on the surface. So what about HIPAA? We did a community event in January for Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and I wish I had read more of what Amy sent you before I went to this event, because so much of the information that I shared after talking about mandated reporting, there were so many questions about HIPAA. And at the time, I didn't have like the perfect answer, but ultimately my answer was about strategizing with who on your team would be the best person to report this, and like who is not covered under HIPAA necessarily, or what is the minimum you would need to report to get the information out that investigation needs to happen. And then if needed for you to share more information later, then you can do so. But based on the links that were sent out, just to review, HIPAA is the privacy rule. It was intended to balance protecting an individual's privacy, but also allowing important law enforcement functions to continue. So HIPAA permits healthcare providers to disclose protected health information, so anything that is identifiable to a particular individual in specific circumstances. And one of those circumstances is child abuse or neglect. So now that the laws recognize that sex trafficking is a type of child abuse and neglect, then you are covered under these laws to report without any concerns about violation of HIPAA. So I understand there's other dynamics at play in terms of whether or not you would report, but do not let possibly violating HIPAA be one of them, because it falls under the circumstance that allows you to share that information. So I want to ask all of you, and I want to make sure I can see the chat. You can either reply in chat, or you can unmute yourself and speak. I want to know, based on what I told you about the at-risk criteria and the warning signs, I want to know, is the situation reportable? So 12-year-old Tanya has come in for an annual checkup. She shares that she and her mother have been sleeping in the car and moving from shelters to hotels and back again. When her mother is not there, Tanya asks you about taking a pregnancy test. She reports that she's been sexually active with her 13-year-old peer. He does not want to tell her mother. Oh, wait. So in the chat or out loud, you can just simply say, yes, this is reportable, or no, this is not reportable, or no, but I have these other opinions I want to share with you.
How old was the boyfriend?
13.
Oh, 13-year-old peer, and she's 12.
In the chat, Kelly shared, think you need to have more than one risk factor to report, at risk, but not reportable. You got me. So the at-risk criteria to review, it's about, we got unstable housing going on here, but we don't know anything about prior law enforcement. We don't know anything about school. We're not sure about the relationships being at risk of exploitation. We see a similar aged peer relationship. At this time, it's appearing consensual based on the information that was shared. And we don't know anything about a history of substance abuse. So that by itself, you're all right. That's not reportable. Next example. Oh, let me see the chat. Hi, Charisma. We missed you during introductions. Do these laws apply to court-appointed minors counsel? I was told minors counsel are not mandated reporters. Is this true? Yes. So because of the role that a children's services attorney has, they are actually not mandated reporters. However, their role in the legal system is to do what is the best and whatever benefits the rights of their clients, who they represent, their children. So while they're not mandated reporters, they typically do share information because it is their other part of their role is to make sure that they do what's best for their child that they're serving. Okay, so for 17-year-old Alex, oh, sorry, follow up to minors counsel. Are they required to receive education regarding human trafficking? I don't know about required. However, within San Diego, we have trained our children legal services attorneys multiple times. And I'm going to go into it in a little bit when I talk about our child welfare response. But we do have a steering committee of which the children's legal counsel participate in on a monthly basis. All right, 17-year-old Alex has come in complaining of headaches and tiredness. He reports he's so tired he sometimes does not get out of bed. He's missed school more times than he can count. He said that he's been using marijuana for his headaches almost every day. Alex shared that he's been arrested and taken to juvenile hall for drugs in the past. When asked about his parents, he says he takes care of himself because they work all the time. And this is a real referral. I've changed the name a little bit, but the situations I'm describing are actual calls that have come in. So at least 3 people agree: high risk, reportable, truancy, substance abuse, prior arrest involvement, also showing other risk factors. Yes, reportable. Yes. So it may surprise you that yes, this was reportable, but this was not coded when it came in. So that's one of the things. So we see at risk, but we don't necessarily think this child is being sexually exploited. But if we look at the actual at-risk definition, like you said, we have prior involvement with juvenile justice system, truancy, and substance use. So this youth, despite whatever preconceptions we may have about the possibility of boys being exploited or the possibility of 17-year-olds being exploited, they are at risk of sexual exploitation. So you would report this and you would say that. You would share, I'm worried that this youth, Alex, is being sexually exploited. And these are the risk factors that I've identified in serving him. Okay, next. 14-year-old Sammy is coming in for medical treatment for injuries from a fight. Sammy has a black eye and bruising on their face and arms. Sammy said that people were calling them a thotty and they had to stick up for themselves. Sammy said they had an OnlyFans account and that their peers were getting jealous of how much money Sammy was making. Not sure. Inappropriate use of social media, sexual behavior, reportable due to suspicious injuries, reportable, but yes, with more questioning needed. Yes, you got it. So in terms of which at-risk definition, use of internet, cell phone, and social media involves social or sexual behavior that is atypical for their age. Reportable due to the account on OnlyFans, which is a sexual app. Yes, so this one, we had to learn a little bit more through our actual in-person investigation to know that the youth was using OnlyFans. So in terms of how it came in, we just had some idea that this youth was interacting with social media in a non-age appropriate manner. Upon further investigation, for those who are not familiar, OnlyFans is this subscription service of sorts where you need to be 18 and older to access it, but there's not like there's some type of screening process to like verify your ID. Like you could easily just make an account and see that you're 18. And it is kind of like you have those YouTube influencers who they have a particular product or a particular niche that they introduce, and that's just what you subscribe to them for their channel. So OnlyFans is kind of a version of that, but you can only access that content if you pay for it. You pay for a subscription. And then if you were to pay for a subscription, that could mean you have, private one-on-one content that only you have access to. You could make requests about the types of access that you want, or it can be something that's live streamed and many people can access it at a time if they paid for that subscription. So the fact that this child who's 14 has one of these accounts is red flag number one. That should just be like, why do they even have this? And then while the way that the subscription service is marketed, it's like it could be anything you're interested in, such as woodworking videos or makeup videos. The true reason or way that people are using this app is for like sexual, exchanges. So yes, this is reportable. And then the injuries themselves, depending, like obviously this doesn't tell us much. We know that Sammy is reporting that these injuries are from a fight. We don't know that necessarily. So let's say we didn't know anything about this OnlyFans account. We only saw the injuries. If we had suspicions that these injuries were happening by a caregiver or parent, or they're happening despite a caregiver or parent being involved, that alone would also be reportable to the hotline. So ultimately, these short examples, I wanted you to just have an idea of applying this at-risk definition to different scenarios. You don't have to have one of these factors or any of the warning signs that I've shared to report. If you have suspicion or you just want to call to consult, please do so. There are so many hotline screeners right now. They're all working remotely. There's even a function now where at this time there's not a long wait time, but there's a function where you can leave your number and they'll call you back when someone's available to take your call. And there's also an online form to fill out now. So let's say you have enough information, you make the phone call, it's 1-800-340-6000. The hotline screener will give you information for you to log in to make a report online. So any follow-up to the phone call that you made can be done online now. It's not something that needs to be faxed. So the hotline social worker, they want to know information about what is the danger to this child. They're going to ask questions about the family, the siblings, the household. They want to know about the family strengths, the support system, and are there any cultural considerations? They'll review the information, they'll determine the response time, and then it gets assigned to an investigating social worker. And it will be to the region of the home of where the child lives. And the first thing that the investigating social worker is going to do is they're going to call you to see, has this information changed? Have you received any new information since you first made the call and did the online report? Are there any safety alerts that I need to know about before I go in person and meet this family? They'll conduct the investigation and they'll provide you with a response to mandated reporter letter. So I'm going to shift gears. So you've made the report. Now what do we do? What happens on our end to make sure that this child who's possibly being sexually exploited is identified and gets the services that they need? So when the law changed to include sex trafficking as a mandated report, the law also said that we need to come up with a CSEC interagency protocol, and it needs to include these agencies: Child Welfare Services, Behavioral Health Services, Probation, the Juvenile Court, and Public Health Services. So in addition to this protocol forming, there needs to be a CSEC steering committee made up of these members and others that come up with this protocol, develop it, and implement it. And anytime there's something going on that's not working out in the protocol, or the protocol is not being followed the way that it's intended, that CSEC steering committee is responsible for providing that oversight and providing any updates that are needed. And ultimately, the other major part of our protocol is making sure that we collaborate with all of our partners and coordinate our services and continually evaluate to make sure that what we're doing is working. So in summary of how this may look when we apply CSEC to the role of child welfare services, like I described in the beginning, the community reports that a child may be sexually exploited. The information is screened and we figure out when we need to respond. If the situation warrants an immediate response, the social worker will respond within 90 minutes with a CSEC advocate, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a little bit. All youth that are 12 years old and up are screened with the SEEIT tool, the Commercial Sexual Exploitation Identification Tool, regardless of what type of allegation comes in. So if it comes in as physical abuse, but the child is 12 years old, they're going to be screened with this tool. If there are sibling groups and some of them are under the age of 12 and some of them are over 12, only the ones that are 12 and up are going to be screened. So from the very beginning, you don't have to identify that a child may be at risk for sexual exploitation. If it comes in some other manner, we're still going to screen that child. We get evidence from the family and community members. We assess the immediate safety and we refer to community services. If it's determined that this child needs to come into care, then there's case management services to monitor the safety of the child. We continually refer to the community to make sure we address the safety issues. And we are also screening all youth that are already part of the child welfare system that are 12 years old and up every 6 months. And if the tool says that there is a clear concern, then we have a CSEC MDT. So the follow-up. I'm going to talk about now the CSEC response team, a little bit more specifics about the screening tool that we use, the purpose of a CSEC MDT, and our regional program CSEC liaisons. So our CSEC response team, also known as CRT, we have advocates that are available 24/7 to respond with social workers or directly to Polinsky. So whenever we receive a call or a referral that someone who is in the community possibly experiencing sexual exploitation or confirmed to be experiencing this, the CRT advocates will respond within 90 minutes and they'll meet the social worker wherever they are. And their role is to stabilize and address the youth's immediate needs and provide crisis management. So the role of the advocate is to be there entirely for the youth. What do they need? Do they need a change of clothes? Do they need food? Do they need water? What is it that they need to be safe in the moment? The social worker's role is to assess, has this occurred, and Now that we have suspicions that it's occurred, what is the family's role? Who is the family? What is their knowledge about this possible sexual exploitation? What have they done in the past, or what are they willing to do now to protect this child from being sexually exploited? And typically law enforcement is there as well for these immediate calls, and their role is to figure out if sexual exploitation has happened, who is buying this child? Who is selling this child? Who are the people that are accountable to this crime? So rather than it all falling on one person to do all these things, everyone has their specific role when they're responding to a youth in the moment who may literally have just been recovered from being sexually exploited. The See It screening tool was developed by West Coast Children's Clinic. It's web-based, it's free, and it is meant to screen all youth that are actually 10 and up, but for San Diego County, we're using it for ages 12 and up. And it really doesn't mean you have to be a particular age to be screened. If there are any concerns present, you're able to do the screening tool. And the tool is not diagnostic. It's just telling us how concerned should we be that this child is at risk of being sexually exploited. Is it no concern, possible concern, or clear concern? So depending on how you answer the questions, it tells you how concerned we should be. If it's a clear concern, the social worker will then coordinate a CSEC MDT meeting. And ultimately, the meeting is really just to get everyone at the table and on the same page to figure out what do we need to do next now that we've identified that this child is at risk or possibly being sexually exploited right now. We need to safety plan. We need to figure out if there's a case plan, what are the elements that need to be on it. We need to coordinate the services that we have, and we need to build the safety network. Who is going to be in this child's life, making sure that they remain safe and keeping their parents accountable to whatever actions they need to do to show that they're protective. The CSEC MDTs have the assigned investigating social worker or the assigned continuing worker based on where this youth is within our system. If there's a probation officer, they need to be there as well. Then we have representatives from behavioral health services, from public health services. There's a regional CSEC liaison, which I'll talk a little bit about in the next slide, and the CRT advocate, if there is an advocate assigned. And typically, even though they're optional, we usually have many other people at these CSEC MDTs. Survivors, mentors, victim advocate. We have their CASA, their court-appointed special advocate, county counsel, who is the agency's legal representation, service providers, law enforcement, and education liaisons or providers. So our CSEC liaisons, they are social workers who are in their particular region or program doing their regular responsibilities and have volunteered to take on an additional role of being a CSEC liaison. So they attend additional trainings, they support and consult with the workers who are assigned CSEC cases. They have relationships with partners who are providers and community members of those working to serve this population. They typically have knowledge and resources that are specialized, that maybe not all the social workers in an office are aware of or know how to interact with. They participate at every CSEC MDT and they attend additional trainings and meetings as needed. So if you have suspicions that a youth is being sexually exploited, this is a form of child abuse and you need to report it to the child abuse hotline. This is the phone number. If you see something online or you as a parent have a child who is missing, or you are providing resources for a family for a parent who talks about their child being missing, you can call 1-800-THE-LOST. If there's something in social media that just looks off, you can also report it to NCMEC through the cybertipline.org. And it gives you fields to fill in, and you could actually provide screenshots or direct links to the material that you are concerned about. And then this was particularly about children being trafficked because that's who child welfare serves. But we understand that so many of our transitionally aged youth from 18 to 25 are also highly vulnerable to being trafficked. And while that may not be a mandated report in terms of the child welfare, we do very much encourage that if you can, and if you're able to build the rapport to get the permission for that person to report themselves that this may be happening, the National Human Trafficking Hotline number is here. And they're there for resources as well. It's not necessarily like calling the hotline and you're taking the report. They're more of an open-ended service that can just provide you whatever information you need if you're not actually calling to report an incident. So resources. Denise, if you're still on, do you want to just give a recap about what iCare does?
Yeah, so we work with youth who have encompassed everything that Joanna just mentioned right now, and the families as well. So any youth that has been referred in as a concern for exploitation goes to the hotline, and usually the way the pipeline works is that the report will come in, and then once they screen, they assess, they will then refer that youth or that family to services, and that's where we come in. So we will then receive that referral. We will then follow up with the party that made the referral, which will be child welfare. If we have any further questions or kind of want to screen or assess for more information, we then will then reach out to the party, the family, and assess from there as well. And we'll go ahead and then start the intake process if that is something that they're interested in. So we are a Medi-Cal mental health service. So we provide therapy. And in that component of therapy, we also have psychiatric services. So we can provide treatment, medication, diagnoses, misdiagnoses, overdiagnoses, and work with the families who have Medi-Cal insurance or no insurance and get them set up for that. And then that's our therapy component. And our therapists are trained in different modalities of EMDR, cognitive behavioral health, et cetera, and have really worked with, have experience and worked with this population as far as this specific role of the youth that are sitting in there that have experienced victimization and don't really identify with it, right? Or are coming to with it. And so working through those things of building resiliency with these survivors. And then where our drop-in center service comes in is within that same building, we also function as a drop-in center. So that's the lovely component where maybe a youth might want to get services for therapy, but might not want to come to group or work on any kind of other self-care or component in their life, right? So they're dealing with one thing at a time, or vice versa. Maybe they want to come to group. Maybe they're ready to come to our therapy group, our self-expression groups that we have, our LGBT group, our homework group, our just Wednesday night group, but maybe are not ready for the therapy. So we kind of meet them where they're at and offer an array of different services to try to find that niche of like where we can come in and where we can set them up for success. And we also have a caregiver support group. So any of the families, so let's say a referral comes in, the youth is like, no, I don't want to mess with that. I'm not trying to go to therapy. I don't want to talk to anybody. They're just not there yet. But parent or guardian is saying, I need to talk to somebody. I think I need to get, a processing group, or has this happened to other people? I'm trying to do my best. I'm over here struggling. What did I do wrong? This is affecting my marriage, those kinds of things. We have that processing group that is led by one of our clinicians as well, to kind of provide that space and hold that space for parents and families that are going through that also want to get assistance too. And then within those social systems that Joanna mentioned, out with all of that interagency collaboration that we do so wonderfully here in San Diego, one of those was the juvenile division service. And so there is a court that is within that juvenile division hierarchy, and we also collaborate with them as well. So then there we can also advocate to take it, bump it a step up, and be there for them at court, or tell them, their probation officer, and say to the judge, yes, they've attended 3 out of the 4 groups, they're doing wonderful, et cetera, et cetera. So we really try to just meet the youth and families where they are, and see where we can come and play that role for them.
Awesome, thanks, Denise. So this service, you do not have to be involved with child welfare whatsoever. So this can be a service that you yourselves end up referring, or maybe your social worker on staff can be familiar and write down Denise's information. So you do not need to be involved in child welfare whatsoever in order to access eye care. Our Safe Place actually follows a very similar model of eye care, which Denise just described, and it's particular to our LGBTQ+ youth. We know that many of our youth are more likely to end up on the street due to being rejected by their family and peers, and if they're more likely to be on the street, they're more likely to be sexually exploited. So while it's not their identity itself that is causing sexual exploitation, the way that society treats individuals who identify as LGBTQ+ make them more at risk for being sexually exploited. So there's a service specific to that community, and that has a drop-in center and mental health services. The STARS program is also with San Diego Youth Services, and they provide case management and mental health services. The issue, or not issue, but the difference between eye care and STARS is with STARS, we need to have either like concrete information or a disclosure or something that a youth has been trafficked in order for them to access those services. The other component of STARS is they staff our CSEC advocate program. So they're a team of 3 right now, and they're responding to all CWS investigations that either have red flags for CSEC or have the at-risk factors that we talked about. STARS is a program that provides these services for us. And then Carmen's on the call. I don't know if you want to talk about La Maestra. I didn't warn you in advance, but we partner with La Maestra as well in terms of medical services for our individuals who've been trafficked. And Project Life North County Lifeline also provides case management and mental health services and trainings for youth and adults. And for adults specifically, they also provide emergency response services and housing, linkage to housing services. And Bilateral Safety Corridor Coalition provides services for unaccompanied minors who may have been trafficked. So I saw Kanani's comment about the tact of helping youth to report exploitation themselves. So within child welfare as a system, we have made this shift, or we have been making this shift for the last decade, where truly we believe the family is the expert of their situation, of themselves. So as much as we've been actually encouraging parents and caregivers to call the hotline if they're struggling, we want them to reach out and get services and resources before they actually abuse or neglect their child. There's also a new shift of having and empowering young people to make the call themselves. So if a young person does not seem like they are in a place where, like, we're not sure what's going on, we don't have enough information to report, but in our gut, we're feeling like we need to tell this youth what they can do to help themselves. So I would supply the child abuse hotline number, and honestly, the resources, I'll share the research brochure as well when I send out the slides, so that when they're ready, they themselves can make the call themselves. And within the hotline, we are experiencing that we are getting greater numbers of youth who are calling themselves about situations that are occurring in the home. And we take that just as seriously as if we heard it from somewhere else in the community. And I know that some of the providers that are listed on these slides, as a way of building rapport and building the relationship, they'll actually make the phone call together. So, and they'll make the ground rules really clear from the beginning, like, do you want to say something? Do you want me to tell you or tell them that you're here with me? Do you want to just hear me say everything and you can correct me if what I'm saying is not right? Or do you want to like share so we can report it together and we'll just bounce off each other? So the providers themselves are also sharing this as a resource with our youth, that they can call the child abuse hotline themselves if they're experiencing any type of abuse. But in this scenario, we're talking about sexual exploitation. I'm gonna just look up here. If there's another question or anything I missed in the chat, please speak up. I'm just gonna try and read a little bit right now.
Joanna, while you do that, say thank you again. I know you're not done yet, but I'm just putting the link for Joanna's thank you note in the chat box. And I'm also doing the link for the attendance. It looks like some of you have filled out the attendance, and I'd appreciate it if we can catch that.
Yeah. Thanks. No, I'm pretty much done. So this is my contact information. We're all working remotely right now, so this is my cell phone number. You can call or text. I am most responsive through email, and ultimately my role is I want to make sure that the things that I'm presenting, the things that are policy, are being followed. And with the help of everyone in the community knowing this information, it will only strengthen our program. So if you're encountering something going on and you're like, no, I just heard a presentation, this is not to happen, I very much encourage that you reach out. And while I can't necessarily share details, I can at least follow up to ensure that our protocol is being followed. And everything that we are able to do for our family with the information that we have gets addressed. In some scenarios, have not been alerted to any of the exploitation risk factors. And I've had to rely on other community partners to share, like, no, actually, these are all the pieces that point to exploitation. And then I'm able to share that information with the investigating social worker so they can make sure to have a CSEC MDT and help that information determine the outcome for the family. So I'll stick around if there's additional questions, or if you don't want to unmute yourselves, you can put questions in the chat. But other than that, I'm good. This is everything that I had to share with all of you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, I just had a question about COVID, because I know that some clinicians have reduced the patient loads. And I wanted to know from Denise and Carmen as well, how have your organizations accommodated patients? Have things gone online, or is the drop-in center still open? What does group look like, etc.?
Lady, I'm sorry, guys. That's Lady. Our doors have always remained open. We have not closed this entire time since the COVID pandemic. It has taken a different turn, and so we have utilized telehealth, and we have done it that way, which we've seen some positive benefit to that, because a lot of times it is the everything of getting there, right? It's the driving, it's the getting up, it's the commitment, it's the scheduling, it's the anticipation and the nervousness. And so it played a positive, had a positive outlook on some of our youth that were kind of really hesitant in getting to therapy and doing it that way. Plus, this is their life right here, right? So they're, as much as we're like, Zoom, we're tired of it, they're like, they do this all day. This is not a problem. So it did take a positive spin. But then we also kind of did see some other kind of a negative side where are they really being, there's a screen, right? And so the realness and the rawness and letting it out and all of that, that's a different, it could play out differently too, right? In the outcome of their healing and restorativeness. So, but we're still open. We maintain open. We also have our groups; those have went on virtually too, and we have had attendance for those. So it's been doing well. The only thing that I feel is the most difficult part is the intake process, with all of the paperwork and explaining and really getting that consent form and things of that nature. The T's, crossed and the I's dotted, literally. So that's the only part that we've kind of seen some hesitation and a little bit of wait time on that. But with the survivors and the youth, they're not doing too well with this. They really are not. They're waiting for it to get over. And then in light of what's happening in our nation, we have a lot of CSEC youth that are folks of color, that are LGBTQ, and they're really tussling with this a lot. And the space that they've created at iCare has just been, it's their home. And so they don't have that place to kind of let it out and check in with us and check in with their peers. And so that's really playing a role too. So, but we're trying to do the best we can.
Yes. So similarly, child welfare never closed. It's been open this entire time. We do the COVID screening questions like at every step of the way that we can. So like hotline, If it's not an immediate issue, we'll try to contact the family even before we make contact. I think the biggest change to practice is how oddly welcoming everyone is to our presence, because they really miss like the social interactions. So usually, or in the past, families would be like, okay, I told you everything, bye. And now they're like, no, stay. Let me tell you more about my life history. I need to hold on to this human contact because I don't have very much of it. So in an odd way, as social workers, we're actually building better relationships with some of the families that than we have before. So it's been really interesting.
Thank you both.
I have a question from Imperial County, ECRMC. I am wondering how would be, in your opinion, the best way to engage social workers. Sometimes I feel like some of the reports that we refer to the hospital don't necessarily directly address the human trafficking, and sometimes maybe the reports aren't taken as seriously if they should be because of what we're reporting. So I just don't know if you have any suggestions on what I should suggest for the doctors or the nurses that are calling to say specifically that might get their attention a little bit better.
I think any of the warning signs that are part of these slides, if that's spelled out, I can't speak for Imperial County's child welfare system. I'd be happy to coordinate with other county CSEC program coordinators if you'd like, if you have a specific scenario. But in terms of what to put in a report, I would spell out how each of the indicators that you're concerned about, like how that is impacting this child's safety. So those are the buzzwords for child welfare. It's like
I can give you just a recent example that happened last week. We had a young girl, she 12 years old, come in with the person who claimed to be her grandfather or her grandparent, not a direct relative, and she had severe lice infestation, and she also had evidence of bed bug bites. She had a pretty severe skin infection, and we did refer to CPS, and in the report we said that she had a severe infection of lice and other skin infections, and we were concerned for neglect and abuse, and we couldn't confirm who the person was that was with her. And when the agent came, the person that was with her was so upset when CPS responded. His reaction was telling from an outside perspective looking in, but he was very adamant that this is a lice infection, and how dare you call CPS for lice? She's been home and it's COVID. And so it was almost like an argument with the doctors versus the person that brought her in. And CPS, did their investigation, and I'm not sure what happened with the investigation because we don't get the follow-ups, but I'm not sure if we could have maybe presented our concerns a little differently, because she responded because the patient had lice, but really there was a lot of other concerns, and I don't know if we adequately addressed them given how he had responded in that situation.
Got it. So I think for that scenario, it sounds like the conflict or the misunderstanding was between the person who brought the child in and the medical professionals. Like that's who was arguing about whether or not this was an issue that should rise to the attention of child welfare. So it's hard because I don't know the specific dynamics of how this person presented, but whenever you're making a mandated report, however early you can in the conversation, just share that you are a mandated reporter, and some things that you may be worried about, you just need to make sure of, even though, so for this, again, I don't know this parent, but I would say, yes, there's lice. We're very concerned about some of these skin issues being medical neglect. We don't have all the answers, but we have enough that we're worried that we're going to contact a social worker to look deeper into it. And obviously that's not going to go well because you have to report them, but I would really focus more on I'm a mandated reporter. This is my job. If I don't do it, I could literally lose my license. This is not personal against you. I have this finding, and these are the next steps that I have to take as part of my role and as part of me making sure that this child is safe.
Okay, and thank you for that. And in those situations, in this situation, we did not notify the adult that was with the child that we were calling CPS because our concerns were very serious. And so when CPS showed up, it was a surprise to the person that was with the patient, and we didn't tell them because we were scared that they would flee with the child. And I don't know if there's any advice or any, I mean, what could we do in that situation? Or did we handle that the right way? Or was
you
there
absolutely
something?
handle that the right way. If there is any concern that they're going to leave with the child, yes, I absolutely would not necessarily share that I'm making this report. It's kind of hard because it's like you want to build this relationship with these people that you're going to continually be serving, and you at the same time you need to balance what your job responsibilities are. So if I was a social worker interacting with that, I would just take all the heat off of the hospital staff and be like, well, we're already here. The report was already made. I hear that you don't agree with what the hospital said. However, I have a role now and I need to learn more information about what's going on in your home, because my job is to make sure that your child is safe. So I hear the uncomfortableness that comes with having to engage with people that are upset with you. And maybe because we only deal with people that are upset with us, I'm just so used to handling it. But I want to say that I trust that the social worker will be able to manage whatever hostility may result from you making this report.
Joanna, may I add something? Just in my experience as a physician working in the Bronx, and you can look at me, you see the color of my skin, and I worked mostly with Hispanic and African-American patients. And Corrigan, having somebody in the clinic who's from the community, I don't know if you do have those in medical assistants or physician assistants or nursing staff, can make a huge, huge difference in getting that rapport with your patient. And really helping them to understand that what you're trying to do is to strengthen their family and provide resources rather than punish them. So I don't know if that would help.
Yes, thank you. We this is a very small community in Imperial County, and everybody knows everyone. And we also have a very high population of dual citizenship patients. So we have a lot of Spanish-speaking patients and a lot of Spanish-speaking staff, and not necessarily a lot of Caucasian, non-Spanish-speaking staff like me. And one of the providers was a Caucasian, non-Spanish-speaking staff member that may have contributed to a little bit to the family's reaction to the situation. So we can definitely do better in that way for sure. Thank you.
So I have a question for Corrigan. Does hospital security have a way of being notified when you're in a situation like that, so that they can, I don't want them to stand over the grandparent, but just to be ready in case that situation goes sour on you?
We do have a way to notify security. That has been another learning experience in terms of their response and how they respond. and what their role is in a situation like that. In this situation, security was not notified that we were calling CPS, and that might be something in the future that we need to look into to doing, because a high number of cases that we refer have red flags. I'm not necessarily sure that our security team is trained right now on signs and red flags, but they should be, along with everyone else, from registration to the lab staff to everybody. But we did just hire a new security manager. We're trying to use our MIDAS reporting system for security to report to the hospital if there's been any situations that they flag themselves as that they needed to respond to, so that we can try to better track these situations, because there's not one reporting situation. A nurse might call security and security responds to an event, but there's no tracking. Like, we don't know if security gets called to the parking lot or to the outpatient clinic or to, the CT scanners in the medical office building. We don't really have one central unit to report. So that's something that we need to try to do, to track all these events, because security is involved in a lot of things, not necessarily CPS reporting, but I'm gonna look into that now that I'm aware that we don't do that. Thank you for making me aware of that. But they didn't respond to this until the person that said that he was the patient's grandfather started screaming and demanding to leave with the child. And at that point, security refused to allow him to take the child, and he stopped trying to remove the child, and the police were called, and the police had to deal with the situation at the hospital. So,
and just a reminder, because this came up with registration and security, in your welcome packet, there's Human Trafficking 101 that is great for ancillary services. It's through Dignity Health, and it does provide a certificate, so there's some level of accountability. And it used to be biased towards sex trafficking, and now it includes labor trafficking, and it used to be biased toward females, but it's now very gender inclusive. So it's a great resource for you to draw from in all of your institutions.
Corrigan, this situation sounds like a perfect way to start that discussion with security services and see if you can improve their response or their awareness in ways of quietly letting them know that there is a potential situation there in your unit.
Yeah, and part of my role in quality and risk management, I had brought this up to them a few months ago about the concerns for human trafficking, and they reported that they didn't have any way to really communicate with each department. So, as crazy as this sounds, but we're a very small hospital, so we equipped them with walkie-talkies and with self-protective equipment, vests, just to make them feel better and give them a way to communicate so that they can respond more appropriately. But we have a lot of training to do there. That's a high turnover department until we got a new manager just prior to COVID. Now with COVID, we don't allow visitors in the hospital. So most of the responses are just to the emergency department and not necessarily throughout the hospital, which is another problem. But I'm hoping that going forward, all departments, all nurses, all staff within the hospital will be equipped with a way to call security themselves. Nobody has a voice Sarah or access to their own cell phone. So that creates another challenge. And we also don't have cell phones for patients in each ER room. So they can't even call for themselves if they're safe finally in a situation to report. So we're looking into getting each little space equipped with their own ability to notify security or another person in the hospital that's not necessarily involved in their medical care, because some patients don't want to report in their medical record about what's happening because they fear that they're going to be subpoenaed. And I've never heard of this happening before, but they are telling us that they don't want to say to their doctor that they're a victim of human trafficking because they're scared that they're going to be asked to testify as a witness. And I'm really concerned about those cases because I know that what they're telling me is valid, and I want to give them somebody that they can speak to around the clock, and that might have to be security. But we don't have that process in place yet. So hopefully soon we'll be able to sort that out for them.
Yeah, the fear of testifying in court is something that we often hear from survivors of intimate partner violence or domestic violence as well.
So if there are no other questions, I want to be sensitive to Joanna's time and her family, I think, also waiting. And thank you, Joanna, I think from all of us. And thanks, Amy, for setting up the card. Yay, clapping online. Really appreciate your time and donating your time this evening to us. This was fantastic. So thank you. Amy, do you want to say any last words?
Yeah, just if you haven't yet, please sign Joanna's thank you note. We try to make sure that everyone gets a little acknowledgement for that effort that they put in, except Denise Thompson. Unfortunately, we did miss her when she presented to the group. Sorry again, Denise. And the attendance, that's really helpful for us, so please fill that out. And feel free to linger if you want to chat more, network, and just catch up with people. I know it's been a while since we've all been able to do that. Joanna, do you want to stop the recording?
Yes. Thanks, everyone, for listening to me, and I hope that the information is helpful in your work.